Welcome to OE 101 Session 2. We're so glad you're joining us today. And today we're going to be diving into open education in practice. I'm Christina Riemann Murphy, Visiting Program Officer for Open Education Leadership at Spark and an Open Education Librarian at Penn State. And I'll be one of your presenters along with Amy Hofer and Gabby Hernandez, who I will introduce a little bit more in a moment. On behalf of Spark, I want to welcome everyone joining us. And if this is your first time joining us for this series, I just want to set the context for the series and the session. Back in 2024, Spark introduced the Open Access 101 series, driven by Nick Shockey, Maria Bond, Josh Bollock, and Will Cross. And it was a really successful series, and so we were inspired to launch Open Education 101. And we're again thrilled by the turnout that we've had for the series and for all of you here today. As you can see, we're using the webinar format, so please use the chat to introduce yourself, share resources, interact with other attendees. If you have questions, we actually have two ways we're going to take them. You're welcome to use the Q&A feature, and we will try to answer as many of them live or in the Q&A as we can. But also know that the fourth session in the series will be solely focused on answering the common questions that have arisen from you all, either when you registered or that you share with us. So we also have a Padlet, and that link will appear in the chat in a moment, where we invite you to add your questions, and we'll collate them and curate them for our final session as well. I also want to note that all participants who registered will receive a copy of the slide deck with notes and links once we have them ready, and they'll be posted to Spark's Open Education 101 series as well. So you're, of course, welcome to take notes, but unless you really want a screenshot, no need to do that. We'll make sure that you have access to everything. So this is a four-part series. Today is about open education in practice. In 2 weeks, our next webinar in the series is on open education in the current moment. And we're thrilled to announce that in addition to Nicole Allen, Will Cross and Brad Griffith will be our guest speakers for that session. And that one will dive into some of the main challenges and opportunities that are currently facing open education and higher ed. And as I mentioned earlier, the fourth session will address some of the common questions that arise around open education, as well as the many questions that surface from you all. If you haven't registered for those upcoming sessions yet, the link is in the chat and also on our website. So who are we? Well, I've already introduced myself, and I'm joined today by Gabby Hernandez, Open Education Community Manager at Spark, and formerly the Open Education Librarian for the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. And we're thrilled to welcome Amy Hofer, Statewide Open Education Program Director at Open Oregon. Amy brings incredible expertise from her work coordinating statewide open education efforts in Oregon across a wide range and type of institutions. And we're so grateful that she could join us as our guest speaker today. And who are you? Well, as of an hour ago, we had around 489 registrants from across a ton of institutions and organizations across at least 7 countries on 4 continents. So welcome to you all. When you registered, we asked you what you wanted to learn more about, and I've collated some of those and put them here. And we're going to try to address as many of those today, and if not today, then at our future sessions. We also want to acknowledge that we do have assumptions for this series. And again, if you may have heard this if you were at the first session, but if not, we just want to make sure that everyone understands kind of where we're coming from. So this is a very high-level overview of open education for a broad audience: librarians, instructional designers, faculty, administrators, and educators. And our goal is literacy and awareness, not necessarily fluency, since we only have an hour each time. We also know that there is a wide range of experience among our attendees today. And while my, Amy, and Gabby's backgrounds and institutional experiences influence us, we've really tried to approach this webinar and this series with broad context in mind. We also want to acknowledge that some of the concepts we're talking about in the series are debated and contested. And ultimately, we believe open education is a good thing, but we know that it must be critiqued. So with that in mind, if you weren't able to attend session 1, just know that that recording will be posted shortly. And in that session, what we went over were the foundational principles, key definitions, historical development, and the landscape. And we looked at the benefits, challenges, and opportunities in open education. So once that gets posted, we hope you'll take a look at that if you weren't able to attend. And we also hope that those of you that came and those of you that watch it left knowing where to find essential tools and resources and how to get connected to the community and the various communities that are all part of this great work. Today, we're going to be talking about open education in practice. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to be looking at different models of institutional support for open education. We're also going to identify potential starting points for you to apply in your specific role and context. We're going to be talking about some of the major OER repositories where you can find OER. and give an overview of the basics of creating and adapting OER. And finally, we're going to be exploring some open pedagogy project ideas. So to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Hofer to talk about these first two learning outcomes for today.
Thanks, Christina, and hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you today and really enjoyed the chatterfall of everybody introducing themselves. So in terms of institutional support models, the first thing I'm going to say is the least surprising, but if you have a budget line to support stipends, grants, other kinds of financial support, that is a tried and true way for an institution to build an open ed initiative. And I'm not going to talk about this very much because I know that financial support isn't something that everybody has, or maybe you don't have the amount that you would like to have. But just briefly, I'll say the examples here on this page. Portland Community College has local OER funding. Oregon State University offers affordable learning grants. The image is what the OSU grant website looks like. And in Oregon, we also have sort of organically developed a community of practice of point people who have local funds to spend and who want to just have a place to bring the questions that come up, like what does your proposal form look like, or what are the logistics of paying people at your institution? So, finding that kind of community of practice has been really helpful. And just to say again, you'll have these slides with the links, so don't feel that you need to capture them as we go along. So let's go on because I want to get off the topic of money here. So another important form of support is recognition in promotion and tenure. And I know that we most often think about, tenure track faculty at universities, but this is also relevant to non-tenure track faculty, part-time folks, community college instructors. There are all different kinds of promotion pathways or continuing appointment pathways that are important to any kind of faculty or instructor. So there are some really helpful resources that can help you demonstrate impact in these kinds of frameworks. The two that I'm thinking of are from Doers and from Iowa State. And in Oregon, a work group adapted the Doers matrix to add examples from actual successful faculty tenure portfolios. So what you see on this page is what the Oregon adaptation of the Doers Matrix looks like. It looks like a table, and this is really handy if you're talking with a provost or a faculty senate committee or a department chair to have something that's really concrete with examples that you can bring to that conversation. So let's go to the next slide. The next piece that I want to talk about is celebrating success. This can be no cost or very low cost. So newsletter mentions, thank you writing campaigns, public signage, door hangers, champion awards. These are really feel-good things that you can do. And the link here is a folder of campus event menu items that an Oregon group developed for Open Education Week. And that's the image that you see here is what those files look like when you open them up, but it's just like a bunch of different ideas of like celebratory things that you can do. So, spreading some positivity and praise around is a really nice way to celebrate your program wherever you're at. And then let's go on, because the last thing I want to talk about in terms of institutional support is policy. And policy means a lot of different things at different levels. But so I've got 3 examples here. And one is to implement course marking or designating no cost and low cost courses in the schedule. There's a lot of information available about this. There's a book on course marking that's going into a 2nd edition that should be out soon. And what this image shows is what course marking looks like at Portland Community College. It's a little bit small, but the right-hand column of the course search table shows books $0. To me, this is an awesome schedule designation because it's right there with the information. You don't have to click on another link. You don't have to click into the bookstore or anything like that. It's right there with the course information. And it's not an acronym. It's not a symbol or a little icon. It just says $0. And that's what students care about. It's what they're looking for. So kudos to PCC for their schedule designation. So that's an example of a policy that's really complex to implement. Another kind of policy that is probably relevant to folks in this room is library collection development policies. So taking a close look to see where you can support open education or textbook affordability in your collection development policies, like finding funding to purchase reserve copies, or to purchase multi-user licenses for monographs or other electronic resources that can be used as course materials. So that's another policy area. And then the third example here is this is a pretty deep cut, but a lot of times work that's created on employer time, the copyright is held by the employer, and only the copyright holder can apply an open license to a work. So figuring out like, okay, who holds the copyright, who actually has permission to add an open license if you choose to do that? Is there something that you can do where you have like blanket advance permission to openly license work that's created on work time, or like easily fill out a form? Like I said, this is a deep cut. It's tricky to find out these answers. So if you do that for your institution and share the information, that is a very big service that you're providing for your colleagues. So, okay, let's go on, because I've been at the level of the institution and I want to zoom in now to talk about individual support, because institutions, of course, are made up of individual people. So how can you as an open ed advocate, wherever you're at, move your institution closer to your goals around open education? And I want to just bookmark that there's a particular category of individuals, which is librarians, who are really active in this space. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. So one of the things you can do is just like start building your network, meet the people that you need to work with. If you want to go the route of an official committee, like developing a charge, finding a sponsor, like understanding the official channels for that. But really just laying the groundwork and trying to understand the processes that other departments use, because open education really touches on a lot of different units that don't usually talk to each other. Like, what does it look like on the back end when faculty adopt a textbook? Like, what does that look like to the bookstore manager, for example? You know, these are the kinds of things that you can just start, you know, like having coffee with people or asking for a Zoom where they screen share. So building that network is an important thing that individuals can do. And let's go to the next slide. Identifying some impact research that you might want to do. And this is not necessarily doing the research, but like just finding out like what data could be persuasive if you need to make your case, right? So maybe you want to gather baseline data that'll help you determine current costs, and then you'll have something to compare against in the future. Maybe you really need very local student survey data to help demonstrate the need for an open ed program. Or you could gather textbook adoption data from the bookstore to figure out like who's already using OER or free course materials that you didn't know about. And so then you can kind of identify some champions and, you know, celebrate their work. And just to note that doing this research is time consuming. And if someone suddenly says like, here's a bunch of money, you might not have time to do it later. So you could be doing your future self a favor if you can actually execute on some of this now. And then the third piece is to scope projects. And again, this might not be actually doing the project, but just identifying what it is. So like figuring out who you would collaborate with and what the need is, what problem are you going to solve, and how will you share your work. So a couple of examples. A number of years ago, there was a group of point people in Oregon that wanted to do a summer project when it was a little quieter. And I had recently learned about the BC campus OER FAQ. And so we made an Oregon FAQ that has saved me tons of time doing email reference, and I have links that I can point to. We built a list of open image repositories that focuses on images of diverse people. We also now have an attribution style guide in there that was developed mostly by Michaela Willie Hooper that is a huge time saver also. So that's an example of a project that we completed and that is in use, but any kind of unfunded grant proposal or unfunded funding proposal is a project that you have figured out the details, you have like scoped the budget, you know how it would work. And so the next time someone comes along and says like, well, what do you have in mind? You can say, yes, I have 3 shovel-ready projects or, whatever it may be. And I have to say that has been incredibly useful to me. So just having a project in mind for when the opportunity comes is also really helpful. Okay, so let's go on. I have some additional resources here. So the first link is a slide deck from a time that we had a procurement snafu in Oregon, and I waited 11 months to get my funding to actually be able to spend any money out of a 2-year biennium. So that's things you can do while you wait and wait and wait for your OER initiative funding. So some of the advice that I've just shared is from that talk. And then there's also an advice column about 1-year OER librarian positions. And that I think has some transferable concepts. Generally speaking, like you might not have the amount of time or the amount of money, like you might have an awkward amount of time or money, right? Like it might not be what you really want to like do all the things. So how do you think about scoping to the available resources in a way that's like effective and strategic and helps you maybe springboard into more later? And then the third link here, as I mentioned, probably a lot of us here are librarians. There is a wonderful paper, and the image here is a screen grab of that paper, and it's by Mitchell Scott and Rachel Scott. And they did this incredible survey, and they found like it doesn't just seem like librarians are really active in open ed, like we really are. And they share their findings, they share best practices that come out of their findings. They were kind enough to do a webinar for us, and that's the link that I have. And I really recommend taking a look at the webinar and their paper because they answer the question like, wait, is this really library work? Like the answer is resoundingly yes. And if you get that question from an administrator or a dean, you now have something to point to, from the literature that says like, yes, this really is library work and here are the best practices. So I recommend checking that out. And then let's go on. So the last piece that I wanted to share, like we've talked about institutions and individuals, and then I just want to zoom out to mention that there's like a lot of layers of activity or in the open ed field. So let's go to the next slide. So what I'm showing here is like at the macro level, situating a public college or university in Oregon. So your mileage will vary, but our institutions are supported at the statewide level by Open Oregon Educational Resources. Regionally, our regional library consortium is the Orbis Cascade Alliance, which some of our institutions are members of. We're all supported by OER West, which is supported by WICHE, which is our regional compact. And then nationally, there's the Open Education Association Development Project. There's also CCC OER for community college folks. Internationally, there's DOERS, the Open Education Network, Spark, Open Ed Global, right? So there's all these different layers of where institutions can find a place to fit in. And in Oregon, an example of how this can work is during Open Education Week, if a point person at an institution doesn't have capacity to run their own local events, they can just point people to the events that we run at the statewide level. So we've got, webinars and a course redesign sprint. We do a lot of activities during Open Education Week so that at the institutional level, people can say like, hey, we're going to celebrate Open Education Week by joining in these statewide activities. They don't have to do the lift of programming all of that themselves. So likewise, all of these different kinds of organizations can help you, like, even if you don't have any capacity, you can encourage people to get involved at these other levels. I want to reiterate what Christina said, that we're not taking questions during this session, but I will take a look at the Q&A and at the chat. I wanted to go first so I would have more time to respond if questions came up, and I'll also put my email address in the chat. And that's what I came here to say, so thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Amy. And you do have a request for a link in the chat, at least that I can see. So, and I think awkward amount of time or money very accurately captures a lot of moments in higher education. So I love that. It's my new favorite phrase. Um, Thanks, Amy. So Amy really set the stage for us today, right, of how your experience or institution could look, depending on your state, your department, your position, your culture, right? You may have widely different support for, incentives for, and even opportunities to put open education in practice. But we really want each of you to leave here today with some concrete ideas for how to do that, regardless of what you're kind of working with or what is available to you. So, open educational practices, what are they? We're going to start with a definition. So, they can be understood as the set of teaching and learning practices that accompany the creation, use, and reuse of OER and/or the adoption of open pedagogy. And this is adapted from DeRosa and Giangiani's 2017 work. Essentially, open educational practices are about how we engage with open resources and open principles in our teaching and learning activities. And so, what that might be, it could be adopting OER, using existing open resources as is. It could be adapting, modifying them to better fit your needs, or creating OER from scratch. It could also be engaging in open pedagogy, involving students as co-creators of knowledge. And we're going to explore each of those in more detail today. Just a reminder, just a quick review of the definition of OER from UNESCO. So open educational resources are learning, teaching, and research materials in any format and medium that reside in the public domain or are under copyright that have been released under an open license. And they permit no cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution by others. So some examples of those could be any of these things and more, right? Textbooks, full courses, syllabi, modules, lecture notes, videos, web content, could be open access research articles, data sets, open homework systems. There's a ton of things that OER could be. And places to find them. So we're going to start there, right? If you're looking to find OER and adopt OER, which is often the first step for many educators new to open education, this is where we start. So some considerations when searching for OER. We definitely recommend that you start small and then expand your search from there. Document what you find. On the right here is just an image of a worksheet that we use at Penn State. I'm a librarian and I use that in collaboration with faculty. But when I'm searching for OER for myself as well, I use a very similar kind of worksheet. So document what you find. It'll save time later, help you remember any learning outcomes you're looking to meet, why you made certain choices and where the gaps are. As you're going, or as you're sharing this with a faculty member, if you're a librarian, review resources for quality, encourage the faculty to look for the fit for their course or learning objectives, and always keep accessibility in mind. Does it meet the needs of the learners? And finally, don't work in isolation, right? Consult with colleagues. Yes, Tracy, we will share that link to the worksheet in just a minute. Especially librarians and subject specialists who can help with discovery. Work with, if you're a faculty member or you know faculty members who are using OER, reach out to them to see what they might be using as well. I'm an open education librarian, but I am not a subject specialist. So I often, if I have a question from a bio faculty, I reach out to a biology subject specialist at Penn State to be like, hey, what do you know that I might be missing? So definitely work with colleagues. When you're searching for OER, there are many places to find OER. These 5 screenshots are not by any means all encompassing. There are lots of other places you could look. So repositories house the actual resources, referatories point you to resources housed elsewhere. Some key places to start, and this is moving across from left to right, include the Open Textbook Library, which contains nearly 1,700 textbooks that's supported by the Open Education Network across all disciplines. Many are accessible in multiple formats, and they also have reviews by faculty in the same disciplinary field. So that's a site that I really like to use. OpenStax, which is the bottom left one, is an initiative out of Rice University. That's the world's largest publisher of OER and also provides interactive learning resources for both instructors and students. One thing I love about OpenStax, and I was just telling my own college student this because I was so excited. His physics class is using OpenStax. I was like, create a free account. When you do that, you can highlight and take notes, right? So that's really great that you can, it's not just a static resource, you can engage with the OpenStax textbook. And those are also available in print. So that's another great option for OpenStax books. LibreText, that center screenshot, is an OER platform where you can access complete courses and also grab individual modules and chapters. You can see what different universities are using, and you can also use its tools to create, customize, and share accessible and interactive OER. That's not quite in left right order, but over to the right, Pressbooks is a digital publisher of open content, and the Pressbooks directory is a fantastic source for finding existing OER. And then at the bottom right, OER Commons is a public digital library of OER where you can search not only by subject, but you can also limit by educational level, including K through 12, which is something unique about OER Commons. And you can also search by standards if that's something that is relevant to your position. Again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. Each of these has different strengths. And when I'm searching for OER, I'm typically searching multiple sources and often all of these as well. If you are looking for subject-specific resources, many disciplines have developed their own OER collections. So these subject-specific resources here and the ones that elsewhere that are available provide more targeted and specialized materials in general repositories. They're created by disciplinary experts who understand the specific needs and standards of their fields, and often by the organizations within those fields. So on the left pictured here is the Center for OER and Language Learning, which comes out of UT Austin. And that site collaborates with faculty to build OER in language. Another site in language is the Pathways Project out of Boise State. Recommend both of those. If you happen to be looking for psychology or you're a psychology faculty member, the NOBA project has amazing resources in the psychology field. And on the right, you can see a screenshot from the American Institute of Math, which encourages adoption of OER and also evaluates and approves those that are suitable for universities. So those are just three and three specific disciplines, but I wanted to highlight that they are out there as well. I would be doing a disservice to librarians if I didn't say, don't overlook your local resources or the resources created by librarians at other institutions. A simple search for OER and biology and subject guide, or for all of us librarians out there, LibGuide, will yield results, right? Many academic librarians have created OER guides that curate resources by subject area, and librarians can also provide personalized help with discovery, evaluation, and implementation. On the left is a LibGuide that I use all the time from Cal Poly Humboldt. They have curated and keep updated this LibGuide that goes by subject, and that sometimes just saves me time from going repository by repository. And on the right, you can see the result of one example of the work of librarians in the Engineering Library Division of the American Society for Engineering Education. An engineering librarian at Penn State reached out to me last year and was like, hey, did you know about this? And I did, but I was like, great, share it with the faculty, right? Like, this is a great resource to point people to. So there's a lot of different ways that you can search for and find OER. Once you have found something for yourself or for someone else, what do you do to adopt it? Well, it's good to remember, and this is often a conversation I have with faculty, that you can adopt an entire source, a whole textbook, or you can adopt individual sections from multiple sources. Nothing is keeping you from doing that, right? And there's no cost. So you can pull in chapters from various OER. You can link to resources or embed them in the learning management system. You can just put them on the syllabus. Faculty do it a variety of ways. Definitely encourage you to let students know that you're using open educational resources, maybe do a little education, and gather feedback from students about their experience with the material. And definitely share your experiences with colleagues. Faculty can share impact stories or talk in their disciplinary meetings or their unit meetings about what they're using. And librarians can keep track of adoptions and share with other colleagues. That helps build community and can encourage others to try OER as well. One of the things that we do at Penn State is we reach out to faculty that are using OER and reach out to the faculty that are not using OER and say, hey, faculty that aren't using OER, all these other faculty that teach the same class as you at Penn State are using this textbook. Take a look. And we've had adoptions happen from just those simple emails. And finally, important to remember, if you're in a position to do this, make sure you indicate your OER selection, kind of what Amy was talking about in policy, right? In any course marking systems you might have, or textbook selection systems that your institution uses. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gabby to talk about the next kind of open educational practice, creating and adapting OER.
Thank you so much, Christina. Next slide. So I really want to start this section of the presentation off by saying that there are so many ways that one can think about the creation of OER. And so just to reiterate the definition, OER can be any type of learning, teaching, and research material in any format and medium, especially when we're talking in the higher education landscape. And so when we think about this in the sense of creation, OER is not only about full textbooks, even though the community talks about this quite a bit. OER creation can be as simple as putting a Creative Commons license on your teaching notes or on your conference presentation slides. Amy gave a great example of how she found the Doers Matrix, and then Iowa remixed it, and then Oregon remixed it. And they continue to put these open licensing on to share that continuous sharing of knowledge. And so it wasn't a full textbook, it was a matrix that fit their need, and they shared that out again. So many of us are constantly creating a variety of materials in our roles. And so something as simple as a template that we use for outreach could be openly licensed and shared to help others in their work. So again, just reiterating that definition, it's considered OER because it's released under the open license, which permits the no cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution by others. So if you're thinking about your own pathway in open creation, choose a path that works for you, that works best for your objectives that you're trying to meet, your audience that you're trying to reach, as well as the time frame you have to complete the work. So next slide. What are some examples of open creation in higher education and what can that look like? And so here's a list of just some ideas. It could be case studies, it could be documents, and those documents, anything, like I said, templates, certificates, matrix, rubrics, any of those things that you create can help someone at another place just get that start, like the idea of, oh, I could do that, or I really needed that and I wanted to do it. I don't have to start from scratch. You could do full courses. You could do course modules. You could do full textbooks, textbook chapters, um, syllabus, lecture notes, videos, media, all of the things, slide decks, problem sets, and so much more. It can really be anything. So we wanted to lay this out because yes, a lot of the times we talk about open textbooks because that is a huge project that requires a lot of steps, but that isn't the only way to engage with open creation and publishing OER. Next slide. So here are just some general steps when we're talking about open creation, and these are really when we're talking about the process of getting started. So when you're thinking about starting, it's starting that what would you like to publish? Are you going to publish an open textbook? Or are you going to publish an open pedagogy project? Or are you just going to publish, like I said, a template or your slides that you have done? So really just take a little bit of time to think about what is it that you're going to do, which will help take you down a specific pathway. But if you're choosing, let's say, a textbook or an open pedagogy project, think about what are you wanting to do? Are you wanting it to be a complete original work where you're starting from scratch and you're going to go from there? Or are you thinking about remixing, maybe taking a couple of chapters, doing a little bit different, like Amy talked about, changing that matrix to her context and what they need, putting in those specific examples. I've done the same when I was a librarian. I took uh, an OER 101 curriculum, and I kept it completely the same, except at the end of each chapter, I added a little chapter section that was like, what does this look like specifically at this institution? Where do you go for these specific things? So I didn't change any of the wording. I just added that little sliver at the end to make something that made sense to my audience and my context. And then once you've chosen your project and you've decided which pathway you're going to go, an original or a remix or an adaptation, then I encourage you to search for OER. So utilize those open repositories. And that could be, you could use them to see if there's gaps in the specific area that you want to create a project in. Or maybe you are going to use that as inspiration of where you want to go, or maybe those are the pieces that are going to help you with your remix. So all of those repositories can help you in various ways. And then once you found the resources and your project, you know where you're going. I encourage you to think about the platform. Like, how are you going to create the thing? Where is it going to live? What is it going to look like? And so there's many different publishing platforms that are out there. And it can be as simple as the word processing software that you're used to using. So like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. It could also be maybe OER specific platforms that have been created, like Open Author, which is built within OER Commons. There's also platforms like Pressbooks that has all types of possibilities when it comes to interactivity. Then there's places like Manifold or Google Sites, and just so many places that you can, once you understand your project, can help guide you through what platform. There's also platforms like the LibreVerse, which is LibreText's whole entire suite of resources, whether you're creating textbooks or chapters or simulations, all different kinds of things. They have lots of different tools to help you. And then there's also things like MyOpenMath, which helps collect problem sets for you to look at and use. So again, depending on the project, understanding that can help guide you to the correct platform, or it can help you create the correct questions to ask and say, I'm creating this type of project. And you can reach out to the community and say, do you have a suggestion for which platform could work best for this type of project? And then once you've decided or you've thought about your platform, then you can start creating. And I have in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some workflow things that you can think about in the creation process. But that creation process itself also doesn't just have to be by yourself. It could be, but you can also have other faculty in your institution or in your state or across the nation or a global partner to have different perspectives. So there's all of those things as well as students can help you engage. And then throughout this entire process, I would say ask for help. Seek out communities of practice for help throughout this process. And there's communities like the Open Education Network that have a wonderful Pub 101 curriculum that's open to use that helps through the process, as well as Rebus has a wonderful publishing community that also helps connect throughout the process of creating open materials. Next slide. So in that creation piece, depending again on the type of project that you're going to go through, it could be really beneficial to develop a project management plan, which can help guide you through the actual creation process. And the bigger the project, the more highly I recommend creating a project plan to help you keep track of all of the pieces that are often involved in creating large scale projects. Maybe not as important if you're just sharing a template or slides. Maybe you don't need a project plan, but definitely for like maybe an open pedagogy project or a full set of teaching resources, it can really benefit you in keeping you on track. And it can help you set your scope and your timeline. If you're collaborating with peers, having that clear understanding of who is doing what, when, roles and responsibilities can be super beneficial. Then you can also think about the review cycles. So if you're doing an openly licensed infographic, right? If you want to write into the project plan, how often are we going to put this infographic out with data? How are we going to collect the data? How are we going to ensure that it stays up to date? Or if you're doing, let's say, a full textbook, are there going to be future iterations? Are there going to be future additions to this? If it's an open pedagogy project, are there going to be other student iterations to this? How does that look? What does that look like? And those things can also be built into your project management plan. And then not just with like the creation piece, but then when we're talking about the publishing piece, right? You created this thing and then you want to share it out for others to utilize. Think about marketing. How are you going to let other people know that it exists? Are you going to have a marketing plan? Are you going to put it on the listservs? Are you going to send it to people? What does that look like? And planning those things out through with a project management plan can be super beneficial. And there's some links in the chat of some tools and guides that can also help you with this because it is a lot of things to consider. But thankfully, with the open community and our open licenses, we have lots to share when it comes to going through each of these processes. Next slide. So considerations for creating and adapting. There's a lot, right? There's a lot that goes into creating materials. So some things you can do is consult with an licensing, or maybe consult with an expert on fair use to really make sure that the resources that you're putting out and publishing are falling in line with what the open license is saying, making sure that the open licenses are compatible in your work. If you're utilizing images or graphics, are those aligning with the open licensing? So there's all types of considerations to think about throughout the process. And so, if you're stuck, definitely reach out to the community. Maybe your library has someone that can help you through the process, or get you to a person that can help you when it comes to consulting about open licensing. Understanding accessibility needs and requirements is really wonderful to think about at the beginning of the creation process. So that way, that mindset and that point of view is built throughout the entire resource as you're going step by step, instead of building an entire resource and then going, oh, wait, I don't know if this is accessible. And then you're going to have to go back to the beginning and check every single tiny thing. And it happens, and that's okay. But if you're thinking about creating something, especially something large scale, there's toolkits that are out here, like the accessibility toolkit, that takes you through considerations from day one when you're creating the entire resource that can help. There's also things like learner-centered design. If the resource you're creating is for a learning audience or for students, think about, do those students want to see themselves reflected into the work? Do you want to have local content built into the resource that you're mixing? All of those things really benefit engaged learning in your classroom. And again, thinking about that from the beginning, is that a goal that you'd like to hit in your project? And then creating that from day one throughout the project is really beneficial. And then other things like peer review. Do you want a peer review process for your resource? Does your resource require a peer review process? All of those things to consider as you're building out, as well as the sustainability. Like we talked a little bit about building it into your project management plan. Thinking about these things when you are building that project management plan and when you're thinking about your idea. And not everything has to be done all the time, again, depending on the scope of your project, but things to think about if you are creating big projects. And always highly, highly recommend reaching out to the community. Even if it's just a question on a listserv, there's wonderful people out there who are willing to connect and guide you through to the resources that can help. And then I'll turn it back over to Christina to talk a little bit about open pedagogy.
Thanks, Gabby. Okay, so the last sort of open educational practice that we're going to talk about today is open pedagogy, which takes us actually just in the same direction, right? It's about adopting, using, adapting, creating open resources that involve students as co-creators of that knowledge. So there isn't, like open educational resources, there isn't a sort of official definition of open pedagogy. So I just want to share a couple things from the open pedagogy project roadmap, some characteristics that often are part of open pedagogy. So it involves engaging students as creators of knowledge rather than consumers. It uses collaborative and renewable assignments where outputs are shared back with the commons in some capacity, not just submitted to the instructor. It emphasizes experiential learning where students demonstrate understanding through creation. And it invites students to be part of the teaching process through co-creation. And crucially, it respects students' agency in deciding if and when and how their work is shared. And this last point is essential. Students must have control over their participation. So open pedagogy is also not just another thing that you need to do to be innovative in your teaching. Instead, by engaging in open pedagogy, you're actually often checking off multiple best teaching practices, using backwards design, increasing student engagement, engaging in collaborative practices. Often there's a flipped classroom design in open pedagogy. It's project-based learning, it's student-driven inquiry, inquiry-based learning. So there's a lot of best teaching practices that open pedagogy can check off, right? And some examples of that, again, these look very probably similar to the creation examples and the OER examples, right? And what students can create or co-create. They could create case studies, slide decks, Wikipedia articles, textbook chapters, problem sets. They could collaborate on the syllabi. They could do videos and simulations and much more. So the key to open pedagogy examples or projects is that these assignments create something of value beyond the classroom that can contribute to the broader learning community. And that is a relative. Beyond the classroom could be the next session of students coming into that class, right? It could be, the world if it's published openly. But there's lots of different ways that audiences can be engaged in these assignments, in these open pedagogy assignments. There's two really great resources we recommend for finding examples of open pedagogy projects and ideas you might want to engage with. Open Education Network's Open Pedagogy Portal and DeRosa and Giangiani's Open Pedagogy Notebook are two great sites for finding concrete examples of what this looks like in practice. Often these have instructor notes or assignment guides and even directions for putting them into practice in a course or in the course you're working with. So I highly recommend that. This is how I found one of the open pedagogy ideas for a project that I work with. Great resources to use. Another great resource which covers multiple birds with one stone is one by Amy Hofer, who is here. I love this graphic for a couple reasons, because it's important to acknowledge that some students may feel uncomfortable with open pedagogy, particularly around writing for a public audience. That's one reason I love this graphic. The other is that it also gives many ideas, actually, for employing open pedagogy, but it lays them over sort of the type of audience that might be seeing the work that students are doing, anything from other students in their class to an outside audience, the challenge level of how challenging those may be, and the degree of discomfort that students might feel based on the project. Based on my own experience, absolutely, this is really important and a real thing. Students have a variety of emotions when it comes to publishing their work openly for a variety of reasons. So that's why consent and agency are crucial in open pedagogy projects. In the class that I work with, we actually have students, after they have submitted their work, fill out a consent form that we bring to the class. And we say from day one in the class and then about 18 other times that whether or not they consent, it has no impact on their grade. I actually take the consent form and I let them know that the faculty member who is actually grading them will not even see the consent form until after grades are submitted. So do a lot to ensure that students really do feel agency in whether or not they choose to consent. And so students need to understand what they're being asked to do, number one, but also have a genuine choice in their level of participation. And we also let students know that they can change their minds, right, if they want to. So those are really important things to do with open pedagogy projects. And thank you for putting that in there, Amy. I appreciate that. Fortunately, if you're interested in open pedagogy, there are many resources available to support educators interested in doing this work. There are guides, toolkits, communities of practice, examples from other educators. As I showed before, you do not have to figure this out on your own. Rebus has published multiple great resources, the Guide to Making Open Textbooks with Students. That's the first one on the left, the Rebus Guide to Publishing Open Textbooks So Far. I love that title. That's the third one. There's also Open Pedagogy Approaches, which directly address faculty, library, and student collaborations. And then on the right, there is a really wonderful and practical Open Pedagogy Toolkit. So highly recommend all those resources. Thank you, Gabby, for putting those in the chat. Just like adopting OER, just like adapting or creating OER, there are also considerations for engaging in open pedagogy. Excuse me. So some of those key ones, just like all the other ones, is that projects can be as big or small as you want. You should start where you are comfortable, right? Faculty can adopt a single chapter and continue using their Cengage resource, right? Use a single open OER chapter just to try it out. Students can author a single chapter. Faculty can author a single chapter, right? It doesn't have to be writing, adopting, or publishing a whole textbook, right? Your projects can be as big or small as you want. So really start where you're comfortable. As I said, consent is absolutely essential. Students must have genuine choice. Projects should really meet course learning outcomes or whatever the learning outcomes are for the class or the project that you're involved in. Open pedagogy should not just involve students doing busy work or relieving faculty labor. Faculty labor is a real concern, but whatever work students are being asked to do should meet their learning needs and the learning outcomes for the course. That's really important. Open pedagogy isn't separate from good pedagogy, right? They're still very much linked. Students might have feelings around writing for a public audience, and you need to be prepared to address that. We kind of mentioned already, the students might feel some discomfort. I've had a whole range of things. Students feeling extremely uncomfortable, students feeling extremely excited to be able to write and put a link on their resume to what they've written. So there's a wide range of emotions that you might experience when working with students on an open pedagogy project that you may not experience. Students, of course, have feelings about all assignments, but when there's a public audience involved or future audiences or students involved, there may be a different level of emotions around that. So that's just something to think about. And the scope of your project will determine your project management needs. I've had successful projects where we just take 5 weeks of a course and do an open pedagogy project where students write a chapter. I've also had challenging ones where we tried to edit a Wikipedia article and we needed a lot more support in doing that. So there's different ways to think about. I like to call anything a pilot to see how it goes, right? But depending on what you're doing will determine your project management needs. Also want to encourage you to remember or to think about Rajiv Jangiani's 5 R's for Open Pedagogy, that these are all things that are involved in open pedagogy projects. Respect, there's a reciprocal aspect of it, there's risk involved, there's reach, and there's resistance involved as well. So encourage you to take a look at that link. The other link that's in there is for about some resources for open student work that includes an example consent form that you might have students sign, so that if people are interested in that, that might be something you also want to take a look at. So we've gone over sort of 3 big open educational practices. We've also covered a lot else today. So Amy showed us that institutional and system support for open education varies wildly and widely, right? But that regardless of that, individuals can make a huge impact with even small efforts, right? So all work sort of moving towards encouraging open education or supporting open education often leads to an impact. I encourage you to take your time in exploring the many repositories and resources that are out there today and the links that we've shared. Gabby showed us that engaging in open education publishing and practices can take many different forms. And I think all of us would agree that collaboration among faculty, librarians, instructional designers, and students on open educational practices can yield impactful learning experiences for all. I think that's one great takeaway from all of this, right? Is that as much as this work is about students, the experience of the people kind of doing this work or leading this work, the faculty, the librarians, the instructional designers, also there's a lot of learning to be yielded from doing open education work. So that's what we have for today for this session. What is next in the series? And don't leave yet because we want to get some feedback in the chat. Looking ahead, session 3 on September 10th at 2:00 Eastern, we'll focus on open education in the current moment. We'll analyze how open education intersects with current trends and challenges, articulate some strategic responses to course material billing models, explore artificial intelligence's impact on open education, and talk about how to align open education with emerging priorities such as workforce readiness, and develop advocacy strategies and positioning for integrating open education into broader institutional initiatives and priorities. And for this third session, Nicole Allen, Will Cross, and Brad Griffith will be our expert speakers. And then our final session will be on September 25th at 2:00 Eastern. That will address frequently asked questions and common concerns. We'll cover evaluating OER quality and credibility, talk about how to provide evidence-based responses to administrative questions, handle faculty concerns with empathy and facts, and support students with OER discovery and use, and any other questions that surfaced in this series from all of you. So please continue to add questions to the Padlet. Janine, yes, this will be recorded. And thank you, Catherine, for asking this question about AI. Yes, we will be addressing that. So before you leave, if you just take a minute, Gabby, if you don't mind putting that Padlet, yes, and link in the chat. Thank you for doing that. So if you still have questions, please put them in the chat, in the Padlet, I mean. And I would love to hear from you in the chat. What's one new thing that you learned, or what's one next step you have for your context? Thanks, Kylie. Glad you could make it. And thanks, Marianne. Tracy's going to start a resource list. Excellent. Janine, that's a great, yeah, figuring out if your creations are owned by the university. Highly recommend looking at your university's intellectual IP policy, intellectual property policy. So creating resources for coworkers, having a project ready when the funding comes, absolutely. People have learned about different resources and repositories. Fantastic. How to plan an OER project. Great. Thank you all for sharing that. I appreciate that. Please keep adding your questions to the Padlet. I see we have something in
There's
the
a
Q&A.
question.
Yes,
Yeah,
in the
will the
Q&A.
shared recording and slide deck include all the links shared in the chat?
Yes, we will do that, Wendy. We will make sure we share that. So thank you for asking that question. Okay. Well, thank you all for attending today. Huge thank you to Amy Hofer for sharing her expertise and her practical insights. Her work in Oregon is truly pioneering in the field, and she's been an amazing leader. Just a reminder, as that question was asked, that you will receive a copy of the slide deck with notes and links when we send out the recording, and those will also be posted to Spark's Open Education 101 series page. No, it's a crazy busy time of the year for many of us, so we thank you for attending today, and we hope to see many of you in 2 weeks for session 3 on September 10th. If you haven't registered yet, we'll throw the link in the chat one more time, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.